Hi, guys. Today I have Nichole on. I am so excited for her to be chatting with us today. We're talking about a topic that really has my heart and it takes me back to when I was first starting my photography business and then also going full time with it as well. And so we're just going to dive right in. Nichole, can you introduce yourself and share a little bit of your own entrepreneurial journey with everyone?
Yes, I would love to. Thank you so much, first of all, for having me on. I am Nichole and I live in Greenville, South Carolina. I'm actually a wedding photographer and an attorney. So
Mhm.
very, very different like disciplines and people are often really confused when I tell them this. And so that's kind of what sparked like this conversation. But
Mhm.
I started my photography business back in college and I was a junior in college and I had, those Word document flyers that I would just post around for $50 a pop. Like it was very, very humble
Mhm.
beginnings.
Yeah.
And I carried on that business through college and then actually through law school. So I went to law school right after college. And I knew that I wanted to be an attorney, but I also knew that I loved photography and I just didn't know where it fit in. So I just kind of did both for a while. And then it was like in law school, I was kind of doing photography part-time and I literally loved it so much. Like I loved the legal analytics side of things, but I also liked the creative and the outlet that I had on the weekends. And I started after law school, I graduated in 2020 during like the COVID times, so it was
Mhm.
crazy. But I started into like full-time attorney practice for a couple years at a real estate firm and really enjoyed it. But I just felt like there was something missing, and I knew that photography was like where my passion was, and so I went full-time just a couple years into being an attorney full-time. So it was just an interesting little twist.
Mhm.
But now I do both. And so yeah, it's a cool mix, but one that you don't find often.
Yeah, that's very true. And I can definitely relate because I went to school for computer science, which is,
Oh,
again, totally unrelated, like very analytical. And I worked full time as a tech consultant for a year, which a lot of people at this point, that was like 6 years ago. So a
yeah.
lot of people don't know that. But that is actually how I started. And I kind of had the same moment where I was just like, yeah, I like this job. Like, I like what I do. I'm like good at it. But my passion and like my heart and like what's going to get me out of the bed or get me out of bed every single morning is
Mhm.
photography. And so again, I made the leap. And at the time, I definitely got a few comments from people who were like, like, oh, like you just went to college for like 4 years. Are you not going to be in like the tech world for like at
Yeah.
least 4 years before you switch? And so today I really wanted to chat with you about, how have you kind of dealt with people? What was that transition like for you as you were going from, working as an attorney to then going full time with photography?
Yeah, for sure. So, oh, there's so much I could say here, but when I was making the transition to full-time business ownership, first
Hmm.
of all, I'm sure there's a lot of like your audience that could relate to me and maybe even you, where
Hmm.
I had photography as a side thing for so long and I was like, this will never be my full-time thing. It's just not consistent, it's not sustainable, it's not responsible of me to do this like full-time.
Hmm. Hmm.
And when I was in corporate practice as an attorney, it was a 9 to 5, very stable, secure job. I was managing a team of 5 at the time. Like it was a very nice job, but I
Hmm.
also am very much a people pleaser. And so I would always be worried, like, oh my gosh, is my boss going to get mad at me one day? Or like, am I not doing enough? Am I doing the wrong things? And they were like totally unfounded, but that was like my mentality in the 9 to 5 life. And
Hmm.
so it kind of got to a point, almost like a breaking point, where I just decided I would rather bet on myself and I'd rather do my own thing and make as much money as I want. Obviously, like there's limitations like to what you can do, but really it's uncapped when you work for yourself.
Yeah.
And so just that, and then defining success differently than what I had been before. I was thinking like, oh, I'm going to climb this corporate ladder. I'm going to, make partner or whatever it might be. And that was just a time where I just felt like my family matters a lot more, my personal health matters a lot more, and to me, time freedom is everything. So not having to be somewhere like 9 to 5 every single
Hmm.
day is just so, so amazing and just what success looks like to me. So anyway, that's kind of where I was at when I made the jump. But
Hmm.
prior to that, especially like in law school, I had a lot of people who I heard through the grapevine would be like, why is she here? Like they all knew that I shot weddings on the weekends and they're
Hmm.
like, why is she here? And I'm sure they were well-meaning and they weren't like trying to be some type of way. But I would get discouraged. I'm like, well, I want to be here. Like I'm glad that I'm here. And I want to be in law school. I want to be an attorney. And I also want to be a photographer. And it was like people, it wasn't computing. Like it was like they weren't able to like make that make sense in their minds, which I feel like maybe you maybe have felt a little bit that way with your
Mhm.
background. And so what it really came down to, and what I really have leaned into, especially this last year, being full time in my business. Well, it's been almost 2 years now, but especially in the last year, I've really leaned into this is that I don't have to make sense to everyone, and you don't have to make sense to everyone. And that's not our highest purpose and highest goal in life. Like, that's not why we're here on this earth, is to make sense. It's not to fit into someone else's box or someone else's definition of what our business should look like. And if that is what it is, we're going to be so limited in what we can do because there's not going to be any growth that we can achieve or any like amazing things we can achieve if we're just stuck inside of this box that we think someone else wants us to be put in. So that's kind of where I started is like, I don't have to make sense to everyone.
Mhm.
It's not that deep, you know?
Yeah. Was there like a defining moment where you're like, oh, like I don't have to make sense to everyone? Like, was there anything that happened? Or do you think it was just kind of like a
Yeah.
gradual shift in learning over time?
It was a little bit more gradual, I would say,
Mhm.
but specifically, and I pulled up this Instagram post because it's something that I posted. It's actually a year ago. It's March 29th, 2023, and I posted this on Instagram, and it really resonated with a lot of people. But at that time, like this time last year, I was having a lot of people. It was like maybe 7 months into being full-time photography, and I was having a lot of people come up to me, like whenever they'd see me, they would say, "Oh, I talked to your mom. She said you went to law school and now you're a wedding photographer." And they kind of give like an awkward laugh. Like that's like what? What is that? Or like we went to a funeral and some lady I don't even know, but was
Mhm.
like a family friend of someone else. And she was like, or someone introduced me. And I said,
Mhm.
and I would always just say, and maybe this is something we can touch on too, but I would always say like I'm a wedding photographer. So that's now what I say. And
Yeah.
then if someone knows me and they're around me and they know who I am, they'll always pipe in and say, "Well, she's an attorney too." And then people, that's when I get the stares. They're like, "What? Like, what does that mean?"
Oh,
And so I remember this lady at the funeral, she was like, "Oh, so you went to law school? Like, why did you quit your job?" And I was like, and I looked at her dead in the eyes and I was like, "Because I make more money now." And she was like, she was like, "Oh," and then she just like stopped talking. But I think that point where I had been in business for myself full time for like about 7, 8 months, and I really was like finding some success and really validating that I could do this full time,
yeah.
that was really the turning point for me. And right around that time, coincidentally, is when people started asking more like, why are you doing that? Or that doesn't make sense. And then I was like, okay, it doesn't matter if it doesn't make sense. I'm succeeding, you know? So
Yeah.
I think that was the turning point.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I will say I almost had a bit of the opposite experience because I was photographing for so long and like at first in my community I was known as like the dancer and then over time I think just because like the aunties would like see things on Facebook like a lot of them follow my photography page and actually like
Mhm.
still know what I'm up to today. I think
Mhm.
like over time they kind of started to almost see me as the photographer and for me, I was kind of like, I still feel like I am very much so like in the tech world. And like you mentioned, like this is kind of just something that I do on the side, but I know I want to do this more. But it took me a really long time. Like, I think probably right around the time where I went full time for me to be able to introduce myself as a photographer. I remember that was something that someone said to me at like a mentor at some point was like, you need to start like introducing yourself as a wedding photographer because you
Yeah.
like definitely are and you're really good at it. But for me, it just took a really long time to almost like own that part of my identity. I think because I was so worried about that like tug of war and people being like, wait, what? But it was almost like continually sharing about it and educating about it. People started to catch on even before I felt comfortable owning it. But I will
Yeah.
say, like, with going full time, I went full time in 11 months after I officially started my business. Like, I had been photographing for years. I just didn't think it was legit enough to like have a
Yeah.
full business. Like, I
Mhm.
was like, let me wait until I'm not in college, you know? And now looking back, I was like, I've like basically been running my business since high school, the beginning of college, just not like officially as an LLC. But I think part of it was just because I wasn't really like being like, yeah, I am the photographer. Like, I know I'm going to see success from this until
Mhm.
I was like a little bit deeper into it. And so that's so interesting. But I got pushback from people closest to me when I was making that jump. And it kind of took me, that was my turning point, I think, to be like,
Yeah.
no, I believe in myself. Like, I know that if I have 40 hours instead of like the 10 to 20 a week, like, I know I'm going to be able to like make the income that I need to grow
Mhm.
and succeed in the way I know I can. And so for me, I think that that was kind of the turning point. And it was like,
Mhm.
everybody at work also kind of knew that like I was a photographer because I would stop at 5 p.m. and be like, hey, I have a shoot like at the Capitol 10 minutes
Yeah.
away. So I like, peace out, I gotta go. And so I think people were like well aware. But when my boss asked me, he was like, so what do you see yourself like doing in a couple of years? That's when I was like,
Mhm.
oh shoot, I need to tell you, like, I'm planning on going full time in 6 months because I kind of hit the point where I was like thinking of either like switching companies.
Yeah.
And at that point, I was looking at the income that I was bringing in with photography, and I was like, why would I go work for somebody else if I could work for myself and make just as much, if
Mhm.
not more over the long term and have that time freedom of like not commuting an hour to hour and a half, like in and
Mhm.
back from work. That was kind of like a little bit of, I think, just over for me again, it was like over time. Like I think there were little bits of moments where I had to kind of like defend myself and be like, yes, actually, I do believe in myself. I do believe I can do this. But for
Mhm.
anyone out there who's kind of going through like a similar phase, or maybe they're getting a lot of pushback from people around them, like, do you have any advice for somebody going through the same thing?
Oh yeah, 100%. So echoing what you were saying, I started my business in 2015 and I didn't take it full time until 2022.
Hmm.
So there was a long period of time where I was having those like self-limiting beliefs where I didn't feel like it could be legit or like a
Hmm.
thing. It wasn't even on my radar. Like
Yeah.
I just always discredited it. And I feel like and not to say my family didn't believe in me, because I think they do, but like it was a lot of like, well, you need to get a job and you need to make a sustainable living. And it's almost like you have these steps, like graduate college, get married, get a job, have kids, those
Yeah.
things.
Hmm.
And so what I would say is, and this is so cliche and everyone says it, but there's really no timeline to life. There's seriously
Hmm.
no timeline. There's no deadlines. And for me, it got to a point where it wasn't working for me anymore. And like you were saying, you kind of noticed like your income was increasing. And so you were able to like step away. For
Hmm.
me, it just got to a little literal breaking point where
Yeah.
like I will remember it was like May of 2022. I came home and I was just crying. I just cried. And it wasn't like my life was horrible. Like I had a great job. It wasn't like it was like this terrible thing. But
Hmm.
I got to a breaking point where I was like, I'm not waking up every day so stoked about what I'm doing in my
Yeah.
life. I'm not like, if this was my last day on earth, I would not be happy with how it's going. Like, this is not what I want it to be.
Mhm.
And so I say all that to say, you don't have, like, I don't want to ever preach, like, you have to go full time or you have to do these things or you have to make six figures because I feel like there's a lot of narratives out there like that.
Yeah.
But what I am saying is like take a hard look at like how you're feeling right now. Take a hard look at what it is that you're doing daily and whether or not maybe you look at it through that lens of like if this was my last day on earth, would I
Yeah.
be like so stoked about how I spent it? And I can like it gives me chills right now. As I was saying that, but like I can honestly say like today, if this was my last day, like it would be so great. And this is exactly what I love to do. So yeah, I don't know. Ooh, that just gave me chills, but it really is so true. And I feel like that can be a big motivator is kind of looking at your life backwards and
Mhm.
saying like, okay, not necessarily that I have to have these like moments on a timeline looking forward, but maybe
Mhm.
looking backward and saying, okay, when I'm 50 and I'm looking back, what is it that I want to have built? What legacy is it that I want to have left behind?
Mhm.
What do I want my days to look like? How do I want to feel? And if it's not what you're doing right now, then something probably needs to change.
Yeah.
But it's also not like you have to do this or it has to look this way. It's more like what is it that life feels like to you and go with that instead of what makes sense, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it does. And I loved that question of like, if this was my last day, like,
Mhm.
would I be happy with like how it's gone? Because I think that I haven't heard anyone phrase it in that way before. And I think that that
Yeah.
is so very clarifying to like, even if it doesn't make sense to somebody else, who's like randomly out there, like, does it feel good to you? Like, I think sometimes we are like, that's like at the bottom of our priority list. And I think
Mhm.
a lot of times, like, it could definitely serve us to be a little bit higher up there. And so, just to kind of like tie off our conversation today, for somebody who is like maybe introducing themselves to someone new or is having a conversation with somebody new, and like, is people are like, oh, like, you're doing what and what? Like, how do you have any like advice for somebody to, like, really stand true and being like, like, this is something that I do. Like, this is like a very valid thing. And like, it's a huge part of me. Like, do you have any advice to somebody like handling the like people that it maybe doesn't make sense to externally?
Yes, I love this question. And what I've started doing, and it's hard because as humans we don't like awkward pauses and we don't like lapses in conversation.
Yeah.
But what I've done for myself primarily is, like you said, owning it. And
Hmm.
so what I'll do is when I introduce myself, and again, I'm not perfect at this, but I'll try to do this. When I introduce myself, I say what I am. So I say I'm a wedding photographer and an attorney, and
Hmm.
then I wait and I don't explain. I've stopped explaining myself. So
Yeah.
that could be something that you could try is not feeling like you have to justify or explain yourself. Because I think we do this a lot, not even just with our work, but with other things. Like, well, I'm doing this, but that's because blah, 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 blah. And it's like, first of all, it doesn't matter what they think. And also if they do care and if they're annoyed or like don't like what you're doing, it doesn't really matter because they're not really a key to your success in business. You are the key to your success. So, not explaining yourself, not justifying, and not making excuses, just kind of saying something and being okay with the silence and letting them like grapple with what it is and make sense in their own minds. And sometimes I'll see the smoke coming out of their head, like, what? Like they're like looking at me like, it's not computing. I don't get it. And it's kind of fun. Like you kind of get a little cheeky with it and you're like, oh yeah, that's what I am. And then it's kind of like a fun little game almost. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, you can't figure me out. So ha.
Yeah.
But yeah, not explaining myself, not justifying what I'm doing and just being unapologetically like who I am and owning every part of that, even if it's not, and also like not having to niche down, like almost like niching is good and there's a place for it, but owning like all the parts of you, like all the things that you like to do and all the things that you're interested in. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I will say, like, I am now 6 years into running my business. And I feel like I kind of hit the same point again because as I was transitioning out of weddings, like, I was doing branding photography and then I was editing and I'm also
Mhm.
coaching photographers. And like, the advice of like niching down had served such a great purpose for me very early
Yeah.
on in business to like lead to success that I was very scared to like let myself be multi-passionate and maybe not make sense and maybe not have like the one tagline of like who you are and like everyone that you serve like in a very succinct way, and so that was something that I grappled with even like 6 years into like running a business, like 5 into being full-time. And so I think that this is just a conversation, like, no matter where you are in your journey, I hope that this is something that people will like just, keep in the back of their minds or at the forefront and keep it tucked away and
Mhm.
know that like your journey is going to look different than like the person next to you, the people you see online, and that doesn't make it any less like worthy or valid. So I love
Yeah.
this conversation
100%.
today. Thank you so much, Nichole, for coming on. Could you let everyone know where to follow with you after today?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I think we're going to have you on my podcast soon. So if they want to listen to that, you can head over to the Self Starter podcast. And then my Instagram is _ Nichole Lauren. So my name has an H in it, so it's confusing, but maybe I'll leave a link below for them to find it.
Mhm.
And then NicholeLaurenPhotography.com is my website. So yeah, would love to have you guys follow along there.
All right, perfect. Thanks so much for coming on, Nichole.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
That was fun.